Hey everyone, this is Justin from Ext.18. The true story I'm about to tell you is a special one. It's the haunted story of my past, literally. My interest in the paranormal was born from this experience, and I'm excited to finally share it with you. Some names and locations have been changed for privacy reasons. Before we begin, if you like this content, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our newest videos as soon as they're uploaded. My haunted past. When I was 12 years old, my dad got a new job working on a hog farm in Missouri. It was a difficult transition for me, my younger sister, mom, and dad, since we lived in Texas all of our lives. My grandma ended up helping us with the packing and was nice enough to tag along and help with the unpacking process as well. It just so happened to be Halloween day when we decided to move up there. After a long, tiring journey, we pulled up to the house for the first time. Our jaws dropped to the floor. The house was so massive and beautiful. It was like a castle to us. It had 2 stories and a basement. I could tell it was pretty old and that it had been remodeled recently. And there was so much open land around the house, it seemed to be endless. My dog Boomer was definitely going to have a ton of room to run and play. We were all excited to begin our new lives here in such an awesome place, or so we thought. We noticed that the farm owner's wife, Jill, was waiting for us on the porch. She told us that her husband, Brandon, would be on his way soon to help us move everything in. I remember looking around and noticing that there was a 3-foot-tall Virgin Mary statue that was sitting at the edge of the front lawn. It wouldn't have been a big deal to mention it, but it was headless. Why would they leave a headless Virgin Mary statue on the lawn like that? Where was the head and how did it get that way? My mom assured us that she would get rid of it as soon as we got settled in. The farm owner Brandon finally showed up after a short wait. His wife Jill showed signs of relief upon his arrival. For some reasons yet unknown, she would not step foot in the house, and from what I remember, she never went in our house for the 2.5 years we were actually living there either. She hugged Brandon when he got there and told us all goodbye, then she headed back home. They both lived about a mile behind our house. Brandon seemed like he was in a rush too, but made sure that we all felt welcome at the time. After everything was moved in, we all started to explore the house. My mom, Debbie, was super excited with her huge kitchen, and my dad, Larry, was pleased to finally have a basement to have a workshop in. My sister Lacey and I got the choice of the 2 bedrooms upstairs. I chose the room that was painted teal, and she chose the white one. These 2 rooms were massive compared to our previous bedrooms. There was one thing that stood out to me though. Both rooms upstairs didn't have any doors. The teal room looked as if it had never had a door, but the white room still had hinges where a door had been hung once before. As we began to look around the white room, we noticed beside the built-in shelves there was a small handle. We were all very curious as to why there was a handle on the wall. As my dad pulled on the handle, the wall began to move. The handle was attached to a small sliding door that was very well built. There was definitely a secret area within the white room. The dust from the darkness flowed out like a cloud of smoke. It seemed like it hadn't been opened in years. As soon as the dust cleared, my dad got his flashlight and we made our way inside. The first thing that we noticed was the door that belonged to the white room was lying on its side against the wall. It was a really old skeleton key door. Beside it was a large folded American flag. The flag colors were faded, and from what I could tell, it was very old as well. That was literally everything in that room, just those 2 odd things. I recall asking my dad if I could switch rooms with my sister before we got everything unpacked, so I could have a door for privacy. He told me that we already made our room choices and that we'd have to stick with our decision for the time being. As we started the unpacking process, my mom told my sister to get upstairs and unpack her things. A few minutes later, my mom thought that she had noticed my sister running around downstairs again. She got frustrated and yelled at her to go back to her room. As soon as she said that, she heard my sister yell back from upstairs that she had been up there unpacking the whole time. My mom was totally freaked out by that. She told my dad and my grandma she thought she saw a ghost, but they all just blamed it on how tired they were from the 10-hour trip. I remember after a few months of us all being settled in, we started to notice things that just weren't right. We would feel blasts of cold air hit our face head on. Sometimes it would literally blow our hair back as if we were using a blow dryer. My parents told us that it was just an old house and old houses have drafts. Right, I wasn't convinced. There would be flashing lights hovering over our heads at times while we were in the living room watching TV. The lights would fly all around us for hours on end. After a while, we just got to the point where we would ignore the lights until we didn't notice them anymore. Another odd occurrence that baffled us was my dog Boomer would growl at things that we couldn't see. He would also play tug of war with literally nothing. Something would be pulling the other end of his rope, but there wasn't anyone there. I couldn't fathom what was happening with all of that. Like I said before, all we could do was ignore the unexplainable things that were taking place around us. Some nights, we would all wake up to the smell of bacon and eggs cooking in the kitchen. I thought my parents were up for a late night snack most of the time, only to find out that they were asleep in their bed and no one actually cooked anything. This happened regularly once or twice a week. My mom had these antique spoons that hung above the cabinets in the kitchen. They would sway back and forth while we were eating our meals of the day. Sometimes the cabinet doors would open and shut on their own. It really made no sense. Outside in the front yard, there was a tree with a hanging birdhouse. Sometimes if we were bored, we would sit on the porch and watch it spin in circles without stopping. The crazy part about that, there was literally no wind to make the birdhouse even move in the slightest. As time went on, these anomalies became a normal thing to us all. We didn't have anywhere else to go, so we had no choice but to get used to it. Even though we were all used to these things happening every day, we were still terrified out of our minds. One morning when Lacey and I were at school and my dad was at work, my mom and grandma were doing some house cleaning. My mom was going to take out the trash, but decided to sit down and rest first. As soon as she sat down on the couch next to my grandma, they both couldn't believe their eyes. The full trash bag was floating in the entryway to the living room. It stayed in the air like that for a while, then it fell to the ground and busted all over the floor. By then, I think my grandma was definitely ready to get back home. When my grandma went back to Texas where she lived, the four of us felt almost trapped in a way. We wanted to go back to Texas with her, but this was our home for now. Before I move on, I have to mention the basement. I can't forget to mention that dark, moldy basement. I rarely went down there, but when I did, I always felt like I was being watched. The hairs on my arm and the back of my neck stood up just by thinking about going down there. I recall helping my dad move all of his tools to the basement when we moved in. There was this door that had an old wooden latch on it. My dad and I opened it up, and behind it was a wall, a brick wall. The bricks were butted up against the inside frame of the door, so there was literally no way inside without a sledgehammer. Whoever put the bricks there made a couple of shelves to put things on. It gave me and my dad a really bad feeling, so I helped him move his workbench up against it. That way, it would never have to be opened. Thinking back on it now, we probably should have knocked those bricks down and investigated what was in there. I'm pretty sure that it was an old wine cellar, but then again, who knows? My sister and I had just one more week before we got out of school for the summer, and we were excited to be able to sleep in, but we almost dreaded being at that house every day all day long until we had to go back to school the next year. I won't lie, that place terrified the hell out of me. The last day of 7th grade was finally over. I was so happy to be done with school and walking home on that long dirt road. I would always take my time walking to the house. The longer I was away from it, the better. That evening, my sister and I wanted to watch a movie, so we put in Star Wars Return of the Jedi into the VCR. I tapped the rewind button, and it began to do its thing. When I turned around, I noticed my sister had her ear to the floor. She motioned me over to come and listen. I leaned down and placed my ear on the floor of my upstairs bedroom. There was an eerie melody playing beneath us. It almost sounded like muffled opera music. I raised up and ran down the stairs. There was no music playing at all. I looked everywhere to find my mom. She and my dad were both on the front porch talking. I went out to ask them if they were playing music or if they heard any, and they both said no. About that time, I started to head back upstairs and I heard my sister yell my name. I ran back to my room as fast as I could. When I arrived, she was pointing at the VCR. She told me it was going crazy. She said that it just stopped rewinding and began to fast forward on its own. I immediately stopped it and started to rewind it again. That's about when we both heard it. That bone-tingling music was playing again. We both had our ears back to the floor listening to it when the VCR started freaking out. It was stopping and rewinding, then fast-forwarding itself over and over again. My sister stood behind me as I made my way closer to it to turn it off. Before my finger could get close enough to end the madness, the freaky music we had been hearing seemed to be all around us. It was like it was blaring inside of our heads. We held our hands to our ears and began to scream. Right when we turned to run, the VCR spit out the tape. It flew with breakneck speed across the room, barely missing my sister and I. The tape slammed against the wall with great force, knocking plastic pieces off of its frame. We flew downstairs in the blink of an eye and told our parents what had happened. They both looked at each other and said that it must have been a bad tape. Lacey and I both knew that they were just making excuses for our own protection. We didn't go upstairs for quite a while after that. A few weeks into the summer, me, Mom, Dad, and Lacey were sitting in the living room around 9 o'clock at night trying to find something to watch on TV. That's when something caught my eye outside in the darkness. I rose up as quick as I could and ran to the window in the living room. I saw a tall, thin man carrying 2 buckets down by the hog farm. From what I could tell, he had a very bony face with long gray hair and was bald on top. I told my dad what I had witnessed and he rushed out the door. My dad was in charge of the farm during the off hours and had to make sure that no one trespassed. After my dad went and checked everything out, he said the only thing that he found was 2 buckets where I'd seen the man. The buckets were filled with dead baby pigs. I know that's strange, right? The following morning, my mom went to get the mail at the end of the road from our house. The farm owner Brandon was there picking up garbage. A stray dog got into the trash cans sometime in the night and made a huge mess. My mom took this as an opportunity to ask him if he knew who the man was at the farm the night before. After she asked him about it, he just looked at her with a blank stare. Without saying a single word, he got in his truck and drove off. His expression was all my mom needed to realize that there was something not right about this place. Weeks passed without incident, and everything seemed pretty much normal until my sister and I decided to switch rooms. I finally got the room that I wanted. I was going to have a door with privacy. If I could have seen the future, I would have never put that door back on its hinges. There was a reason it was hidden behind those shelves. Once Lacey and I got everything settled, I had my dad help me put the door up. My dad knew something wasn't right about that door though. He pointed out that there were strange scratch marks all over it. He said that the previous residents must have had a dog or something and that he would eventually paint over it. That very night, I was laying in my bed listening to the radio about to fall asleep, when I thought I heard the door handle jiggle. I rose out of bed to see what it was. I moved closer to the door and the knob started to turn a few times. It scared the hell out of me, so I stopped dead in my tracks. The only light in the room was coming from my radio, and I couldn't reach the light switch since it was right next to the door. I stood there for about 5 minutes until I got the nerve to move closer. Once I took a step, the handle went crazy. It shook violently over and over until my dad made it up to the top of the stairs. As soon as he put his hand on the door, it stopped in an instant. Lacey and I both slept downstairs for months after that, and my dad decided to take the door down and put it back where we found it. All of the weirdness around the house began to die down after a while. When I started my 8th grade year, I made a couple new friends. They were both a year or two older than me, and I looked up to them a lot. One of them was an awesome skateboarder, and I wanted to be able to do what he could do, so I took up skateboarding. The other was really good at video games and a super snazzy dresser, so I started playing more video games than usual and cared more about what I wore. I was preoccupied for the most part, so I wasn't noticing anything around the house anymore. On occasion, I would get that feeling like someone was watching me, or I would feel the hairs on my arm stand up. I would just brush it off and keep doing what I was doing. I was getting older and really needed my privacy, so I hung the old door back in my room. Yeah, big mistake. When my mom and dad found out, they were utterly pissed. They told me to take it down, but I was a defiant 13-year-old that didn't listen. The door went crazy every night on and off. It got to the point that I would just look at it and it would start freaking out. My dad ended up taking the door down when I was at school one day. When I got home, I just put it right back up. I wasn't scared of the door anymore like my sister and parents were, but I should have been. It was a Saturday night and one of my friends was staying over. We played video games all night long until we got tired around 2 a.m. We both laid down with the radio on about to fall asleep when we heard the door handle start to vibrate. It started doing its usual thing, but then it got to where it was turning way more violently than ever. It sounded like someone was banging their fist on the door as hard as they could. The radio began to gain interference the louder the knocking and shaking got. It started to grow louder as it scanned through the stations on its own. In our cries of fright, I unplugged the radio, then made a dash for the light switch, and once I hit the light switch, it became dead silent in the room. I felt like it was the calm before the storm. Right before we could open the door, we heard what we thought was my dad angrily coming up the stairs. I called out to him to see if he would answer, but there was nothing, just stomping footsteps making their way closer to the room. My friend urged me to open the door, but I couldn't because I was too damn scared to see what lied on the other side of it.
A part of me wanted to think that it was my dad, since he was a prankster at times, but it wasn't him. When the footsteps finally stopped, I tried to look through the skeleton keyhole, but there was something on the other side blocking my vision. As soon as I said, "Dad, is that you?" the door began to shake and the knob rattled furiously. If things couldn't get any worse, the unplugged radio turned on full blast behind us. By this point, we were both done and couldn't handle the stress of the situation anymore, so we decided to climb out the window. The only problem was we were on the second floor, and it was a long fall. I didn't care though, I just wanted out of that room no matter what. We frantically tried to open the 2 windows in my room, but it was like they were glued shut. It was strange since we had the windows open just a few hours earlier. After a few more moments of madness, my mom and dad finally burst into the room and asked what was going on with all of the noise. We tried to explain the situation to them exactly how it went down. They just looked at each other with the same look that they always gave and said, "You guys are just tired. It's your imaginations. Go to bed." I was so upset that they didn't believe me, even though I knew that they knew the house was haunted as hell. That was the last time I ever slept in that room, and the last time that friend ever spent the night with me again. While my family and I continued to try to ignore the strange occurrences, they were beginning to get more and more frequent. My parents started to take trips back to Texas to see our family. They were also looking for my dad a new job. Eventually, my grandma Joanne decided to move up to Missouri to live with us so we wouldn't be so afraid anymore. It was really nice having her around. It made us all feel a little bit safer. She moved all of her things to the room next to the basement door. Her room had this ugly red, yellow, and orange shag carpet in it. No matter what time of the year it was always freezing cold in there too. There was a small closet in the corner of the room. When we were helping her put some of her things in there, we noticed some drawings on the wall close to the floor. It was stick figures drawn in crayon. It was pretty creepy. Late one night, I woke up to my mom screaming while I was asleep on the couch. I looked down the hallway and saw my sister and my grandma running to my mom's room. When I finally got there, she was sitting up on the side of her bed, with my dad consoling her. At the time, she didn't tell us anything that happened. She just said that she had a bad dream. Without hesitation, she told me and my sister that we weren't allowed to sleep alone anymore. From that moment on, we slept in my grandma's room with her. We also weren't allowed to go upstairs anymore unless one of our parents was with us. I hated sleeping in that cold room with the red carpet. I preferred the couch in the living room. Every night, the covers would slide off of us from the foot of the bed. As the nights went on, the covers would be pulled more and more violently, just like how the door escalated. My grandma had a couch in that room as well that she slept on, and she even started to complain about her blankets being pulled away too. My sister and I were tired of not getting any sleep, so one night we decided to keep a firm grip on our blankets. Sure enough, a light tug started on the covers. That light tug became stronger by the second. It was like whatever was doing it was pissed off that we wouldn't let go. Finally, we didn't have the strength to hold onto the blankets any longer. As soon as we lost our grip, the bed sheet and cover flew into the air like a parachute caught in a high wind. How do you explain something like that? It doesn't make a bit of sense at all. The covers continued to be ripped off the bed almost every night. We just let it happen so we didn't anger what we couldn't see. My whole family was at their wits' end at that point. No one was sleeping anymore. We were all scared to even be in a room alone. Another thing that really terrified us was we were all sitting in the kitchen at the table. Then all of a sudden, we hear a loud crash upstairs. Our mouths dropped when we made our way to my bedroom after checking Lacey's room first. I had a disc holder that held about 40 PlayStation games mounted on the wall. When we entered the room, it was on the floor underneath where it was hung. The games weren't on the floor with it though. They were on my bed, perfectly lined in 4 rows of 10. Upon investigation, we noticed that they were in alphabetical order. It was really creepy. A few days went by after that. I went to stay over at my friend's house. When I came home, my sister was on the couch crying. My mom and grandmother were surrounding her, trying to calm her down. She was frantic. She kept saying that the man in the closet, he tried to get me. We all finally got her to calm down. She didn't want to talk about what happened, but she finally told us. She said that she was just grabbing some clothes out of the closet in her room, even though my mom told her to never go up there by herself. When she walked into the room, she made her way to the closet, but before she opened the door, she heard a rustling sound. She thought it was just her imagination, so she opened the closet door. She didn't see anything at first, but she noticed in the corner of her eye, on the floor, there was a movement. It was a thin, bony old man with long gray hair. He was pale and was smiling ear to ear. She said once her gaze met his, he crawled out of the closet towards her, laughing hysterically, wearing nothing but a pair of my boxer shorts. My dad and I both got the courage to go look in the closet. There wasn't an old man there, but sure enough, my boxers were right there on the floor. Was this the same guy that I saw all those nights ago? He left the buckets that he was carrying, and now he left the boxers on the floor. Even though it didn't make any sense and we couldn't explain any of it, I think we all knew it was time to leave that place. We had made arrangements to move back to Texas. The day we were about to leave, we all stood there and looked at the house. I remember my mom waving and saying, "Goodbye, ghosts." On the trip, she told us what happened to her the night we heard her screaming. She said that my dad and her were falling asleep and he had his arm around her when something lifted his arm off of her. He tried to put his arm back around her, but it lifted his arm and dropped it to his side again. My mom said she tried to get up, but something was holding her down. She was lying on her back and felt a strong force on top of her. As she lied there in fear, my dad was scared stiff as he watched the bed sink as if there was another person on it with him. My mom started to scream when she felt a body on top of hers. She was paralyzed. My dad shook her and tried to pick her up, and by that time, whatever it was had left the room. To this day, that house still haunts my dreams. I wish we never had to go through all of that, but I'm glad that we did. It made us all closer and stronger in the end. It definitely opened our eyes to things that we didn't necessarily believe in before. My grandma passed away last year in 2019, and we love and miss her dearly. She used to tell me these ghost stories that she experienced when she was a kid that really used to freak me out. I would love to tell you guys some of those on this channel eventually. And before I forget, me and my friend Clint were scanning through some old photos of the house and found this. This was in my sister's room before we switched bedrooms. We zoomed into the mirror and noticed it. Could this monster or demon looking thing been the cause of our misery for 2.5 years? If you guys have any idea of what it might be, let me know in the comments below. Anyways, thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed my story, and if some of you have a scary story to tell, fiction or non-fiction, and want it to be featured on Ext.18, send it to the link below. I'm going to pick one of your stories every month to be featured on the channel. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you again in the darkest depths of Ext.18.